So now this is going to be the final installment of the Black Greek Mythology series. And as I've already stated, the next series that will come out subsequent to this one will be about the ancient Egyptians, which is going to be a very extensive and intriguing series delving into the origins of the ancient Egyptians and who their descendants are to this day. But in regards to this video, this will act as an inroads to that series as well as other series on topics like the Muslim Berbers, aka the Moors, and the ancient prehistoric peoples of Europe, and a bevy of other topics later on down the line. So now let's get into Epaphus. So Epaphus was the son of Zeus and one of the many mortal lovers of Zeus known as Io. Their story is one of the more scandalous ones in all of Greek mythology. The story goes that Io was an Argive princess, and for those of you who don't know, Argive or Argos is a city in Argolis, Peloponnese, Greece, and I believe it is one of the oldest inhabited cities in the world to this day. But anyway, she was an Argive princess who Zeus ended up falling in love with, and he would eventually have to hide their relationship from his wife Hera. But despite Zeus's best efforts, he couldn't hide Io from Hera for very long, and would end up having to change Io into a white heifer or a white cow. And then one day, Hera saw the heifer standing next to Zeus, and he lied about his awareness of the heifer's presence. And so Hera, understanding that Zeus was not being honest, asked for the heifer as a gift so that she could send it away for good. And so long story short, Io will go on a long journey across the Mediterranean until she eventually ended up reaching the Nile. And this would be the place where Zeus would restore her human form, and the Nile will come to be known as the birthplace of Epaphus. But some ancient Greek historians like Strabo state that he was born in a cave in Eubea or Euboea. It's, you guys can look it up. It's spelled Euboea. But that's an island in Greece. But nevertheless, Epaphus was the product of an affair between Zeus and Io, and he would go on to become the king of Egypt, succeeding his said to be stepfather Telegonus, who of course was the previous king of Egypt before Epaphus, and he eventually became the husband of Io. So Epaphus would later go on to marry Memphis, who was the daughter of Nilus. Nilus was the Greek god of the Nile River, and this union was the reason for Epaphus being regarded as the founder of Memphis, Egypt, which was the capital of ancient Egypt and acted as one of the most important cultural centers in all of ancient Egypt. But this wasn't the only thing of significance that sprung forth from the union between Epaphus and Memphis. They would eventually become the parents and ancestors of some of the most significant figures in all of Greek mythology, and they also became the forerunners of many nations who we're going to take a look at in a minute. But Epaphus and Memphis became the parents, firstly, of Libya. Now, Libya was the personification of the land in North Africa of the same name, and Libya, I believe, received its eponym from the daughter of Epaphus, who of course was named Libya. And so a lot of you who are avid learners or avid students of history know that Libya is part of a region in North Africa known as the Maghreb. The Maghreb is like the western part of North Africa or Northwest Africa, and it includes lands like Algeria, Mauritania, and of course Libya. And the significance of these lands in North Africa is they are regarded as the birthplace of one of the most significant groups of people during the medieval time period, or the Middle Ages, known as the Moors. Now, the Moors will be another story for another day when I do my individual series on the Moors in the very near future. But there has always been this, or I should say, relatively recently, there has been this controversy over what the Moors looked like, with some people asserting they look like the people who occupy the Maghreb today, and some say, I think we can guess the group of people who say this, but some say they were Caucasians with blonde hair and blue eyes, and then others assert that they were so-called black people. What I will say is the quote-unquote Moors were a very diverse group of people that did eventually include so-called Caucasians as well as other ethnic groups as well. And then there was a lot of intermixture and admixture amongst those various groups as well. And they all adopted the religion of Islam, but the Moors originally were indeed so-called black people. And one of the many indicators of this fact, because it is a fact, but one of the main indicators of this fact is the association that the Libyans have with Epaphus and his progeny. Like I stated, Epaphus, along with his wife Memphis, became the ancestors of many nations that, of course, included the Libyans. But They were also the forefathers of many, many other nations that were regarded as being what we would call today's so-called black or negroid peoples. And this is attested to by the legendary Greek poet himself, Hesiod, who stated that Epaphus was the forefather of many dark-skinned nations of people, mainly through Libya, but also from other daughters that were attributed to Epaphus, like one of his daughters named Lysianassa, who, according to Apollodorus of Athens, an ancient Greek scholar, was a daughter of Epaphus as well. But let's go about looking at what nations of people Epaphus was the ancestor of, according to the ancient Greek poet Hesiod. So now this is a quote from the epic poem written by Hesiod, known as the Catalogue of Women. So now let's read what he has to say in this poem about Epaphus. So, for verily Epaphus was the child of the almighty son of Kronos. For those of you who don't know, that's Zeus. Zeus was the son of Kronos, and from him sprang the dark Libyans and high-souled Ethiopians and the underground folk and feeble Pygmies. So now, as we can see here, Hesiod mentions 4 nations of people, most of which are conventionally regarded today as quote-unquote black African nations. We see the dark Libyans. Now, some translators interpret dark as black, but we'll just stick with the translation of dark for now. But we see the next ethnic group that's mentioned are the Ethiopians. Now, I went over what the term Ethiopian or Ethiops meant in my previous video about Zeus being called Aethiopes on the island of Chios in much greater detail, so you guys can go and check that out if you want. But the term Aethiops or Ethiopian basically is just a synonym for a so-called black person. All right, but anyway, the next 2 that are mentioned are the underground folk and the Pygmies. Now, the underground folk are a bit of a mystery. They're said to be a quote-unquote dog-headed race of people who were native to Africa and India. But like I said, it's a bit of a mystery who they were exactly. And then lastly, we see the Pygmies, who are also mentioned. So now the Pygmies are a diminutive African race that still inhabit and are native to various lands all over the world. There are various different types of Pygmies. The main one that most people are aware of are the so-called African Pygmies that are native to Central Africa, mainly near the Congo Basin area. And then you also have the Pygmies of Cameroon and Gabon, and their specific tribal names are the Aka and Baka, and then the Gili and Kola, and then the Bongo people of Gabon. And so another Pygmy tribe from the Congo region are the Mbuti people of the Congo, and then the Batwa, who reside in and around the African Great Lakes region on the border of Central and Eastern Africa. So you have the African Pygmies, but then there are a lot of other lesser-known Pygmy tribes outside of Africa as well, who are known as the Asiatic and Oceanic Pygmies. And they're native to countries in Southeast Asia, like the Philippines, where they're known as the Batak and the Ayeta. And then there are the Andamanese people of the Andaman Islands, which are a chain of islands near the northeastern Indian Ocean. And they also reside in a region known as the Bay of Bengal, near lands like Sri Lanka and India. And then you have tribes that are known as the Jarawas, the Sentinelese, and then the Anj, and then there's the Champim. And then lastly, for the Pygmies of Southeast Asia, there exists the Semanj of the Malay Peninsula, which is a peninsula in mainland Southeast Asia, and it contains part of Malaysia and Thailand. And so now we have the Pygmies, who are known as the Australo-Melanesians, and they mainly comprise of the ethnic groups known as the Papuans, who are the Aboriginal inhabitants of Western New Guinea and Indonesia, and then the Aboriginal inhabitants of Melanesia as well, and then the Aboriginal Australians who inhabit many islands in Australia, such as Tasmania, Fraser Island, Hinchinbrook Island, the Tiwi Islands, and Groot Eland, which is like the 4th biggest island in all of Australia. And there are various other Pygmy Negritos that reside in Fiji, New Caledonia, which is near the southwest Pacific Ocean, the Aborigines of the Solomon Islands in Oceania, and lastly Vanuatu, which is near the South Pacific Ocean. Okay, so now of course, as I showed in the pictorials, all of those tribes are so-called black, literally Negritos, which is a Spanish word for a little black person. And I want you guys to keep in mind that most of those tribes are aboriginal to the lands that they inhabit, from India to Australia to certain parts of Asia, so on and so forth. So they're all aboriginal to those lands. So for a lot of you people who are still on that all black people are just indigenous to African narrative, once again, you need to get off of that, because as I've stated in the past, the so-called black man and black woman are aboriginal to the vast majority of the world. Okay? And before it slips my mind, just going back to the Pygmies for a minute, there are traces of the so-called Pygmy race that have been found in European countries as far back as the prehistoric time period. Traces of the Pygmy race have been found in European lands like Spain, Switzerland near the Alps areas, Scandinavia, and then even all over Central Europe. And then even Britain was said to have been inhabited by a race of quote-unquote Pygmies prior to the arrival of the Celts in and around the quote-unquote Neolithic or New Stone Age time period. And not to digress, but pretty much all of the original inhabitants of Great Britain were so-called black. Even the Celtic peoples. All right, but I'm sure a lot of you have heard about the quote-unquote Cheddar Man, who was a so-called black Brittonic man from, I believe, the Mesolithic time period in Great Britain. But all of that will be another series for another day. But yeah, all of those ethnic groups were so-called black or Negroid peoples who were native or aboriginal to Europe. So again, you brothers and sisters need to get off of the African stuff, or the quote-unquote Africa is the birthplace of all black people stuff. All right, but anyways, now that we've looked at all the ethnic groups that according to Greek legend descended from Epaphus, let's circle back around to him and his daughter Libya.